But the reason that Israel went to war with Iran and the US then intervened in support of Israel was, of course, to dismantle and destroy any prospect of a nuclear Iran. And it is too early to tell whether that outcome has been achieved.
Israel and Iran have agreed to a ceasefire after 12 days of bombarding each other. The halt in fighting was announced first by Donald Trump. The American president says his use of massive bunker-busting bombs has destroyed Iran's nuclear facilities. The president is due here in The Hague for the NATO summit shortly. He wants to hear his allies commit to increasing defence spending, and the UK government says it will do just that. But is 5% of GDP on defence and, crucially, security spending too by 2035 enough? General Sir Patrick Sanders, who was Chief of the General Staff, the title given to the head of the British Army, he also now presents the Times podcast, The General and the Journalist, joins us on the line. Good morning.
Okay.
First, your reaction to that ceasefire announcement. It has been announced by Donald Trump. It's now been confirmed by both sides. Surely a welcome move.
Yeah, it's got to be welcome. I mean, I've got slight whiplash, like everybody else, I think, over the events of the last 12 days, and particularly since the US intervention. But the truth is, it's probably too early to tell. So we should welcome the ceasefire and the de-escalation that it represents. But the reason that Israel went to war with Iran and the US then intervened in support of Israel was, of course, to dismantle and destroy any prospect of a nuclear Iran. And it is too early to tell whether that outcome has been achieved as a result of these 12 days. And probably in the long term, it's likely to fuel Iran's appetite to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and to make a dash for a bomb.
So in your view, what needs to happen now to prevent that worst case scenario?
Ideally, it's achieved through diplomatic negotiations. I mean, in any conflict, it always ends up with some form of negotiation and a diplomatic outcome. And of course, Iran has got a track record here of agreeing to diplomatic terms. I mean, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which, of course, President Trump walked away from, which is what triggered the accelerated enrichment of uranium by Iran, points to the fact that Iran can be brought to the table and we can have verification and some confidence. But at the moment, that looks unlikely. So we've got to see how the next few weeks play out and if a deal can be brought about. If it can, it would be a genuine triumph.
And what role should the UK be playing here? Because I think it's fair to say most people looking at this situation would say that the UK government has been sidelined, maybe that most other governments have been sidelined here by Donald Trump and America, acting in concert with Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. Can the UK play a part? And should it crucially have done more in the early stages of this conflict, I suppose, between Israel and Iran?
I think there's quite a lot of hand-wringing about this. We should be clear that Israel was always, if it was going to attack Iran, it was always going to do it under conditions of extraordinary secrecy, and it was only ever really too likely to involve its closest ally and supporter, which is, of course, the United States. And undertaking an operation, first of all, like the Israelis did, extraordinarily effectively, and then the United States did, requires extraordinary secrecy. So had they needed to use, for example, the base that we have in Diego Garcia, I'm sure they would have asked. But maintaining secrecy is probably the most important thing. And so I don't think we should be too worried that we weren't involved in that strike. When it comes to this phase, which is negotiation, there we have a very large role to play because, of course, we were one of the original negotiators, if you like, parties involved in the JCPOA, that agreement I referred to. And there, I think our diplomatic efforts can make a real contribution.
And do you think that the government is credible enough when it comes to defence? I mean, there's been a lot of back and forth on how much money the UK is going to commit to defence spending. I'm here at the NATO summit. There is going to be a commitment to 5%, but crucially, it's 3.5% on hard defence spending, 1.5% on things around the edges, including infrastructure and potentially border security too. Is the UK government credible when it comes to being a sort of a real force in these kinds of negotiations?
That's a really important word, Kate. Credibility is one of the most important components of deterrence, because what we're trying to do here is to deter, first of all, and first and foremost, Russia, but also China and other actors who might pose a threat to NATO territory. It's worth reminding ourselves that we sign up to defending all NATO territory, not just European NATO territory. So that includes the United States. Now, credibility comes down from, do you have the capability and the will to use it, and can you use it in time? And the time factor here is really important, because all of the estimates are that Russia could rearm itself within a couple of years. President Putin announced, in fact, he announced before, but reminded us that he was restructuring and increasing the size of the Russian armed forces from 1.3 million to 1.5 million, creating new military districts in Leningrad and Moscow, which face off against Finland and Sweden, the northern part of NATO's territory. So there is a real sense of threat and time. And if we can't respond with credible forces in time to deter that, then then there are real doubts. And of course, at the moment, we're spending 2.3%. The intention is not to spend more than 2.6%, according to the reports I've seen, by 2029. And that feels too little, too late. I have no problem with the 1.5% on associated infrastructure, because we need that sort of societal and national resilience. And indeed, across all of NATO, we need to be able to have bridges that can take armored vehicles, tanks railways that can move equipment around quickly. That is a good and important investment. It's the getting from 2.3% to 3.5% in time, and the time we should be looking at is around 2030, that really worries me.
And it sounds like you don't think the government's promises on this are credible.
Well, I think the government has promised to achieve 2.6% within this parliament. That's by 2029. That's a 0.3% increase on top of the existing budget. So that doesn't feel like it really has a sense of urgency. And the crucial thing is, are we meeting the capabilities that SACEUR, that's the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Chris Cavoli, has asked for and that we've committed to in the sort of time frame? And that's the key thing that we need to judge.
When should we be spending the 3.5% in your view?
We should be accelerating the profile of our spending, so spending it faster from now. 2029 would be too late. Going back to your point about credibility, the thing we should remind ourselves, though, is, of course, we are one of 3 nuclear powers in NATO and one of only 2 European ones. So although our conventional capabilities have been hollowed out and are not being modernized rapidly enough, the nuclear deterrent does represent a very, very strong and fundamental part of the credibility. And it's worth saying that.
Can I ask you, just finally, we are running out of time, but I am here at NATO and a lot of the conversation is around Donald Trump's commitment to NATO, perhaps not American commitment, but certainly Donald Trump's commitment to NATO. Do you still believe that the rest of NATO can rely on the US with Donald Trump as president?
Yes, I do. And I don't say that because it's the sort of thing that should be said. I genuinely believe it. I think that the US recognize that their own security, and Donald Trump recognizes that America's security doesn't start at its own shores. As the Prime Minister of Norway pointed out to him on a visit recently, the submarines that would threaten the United States come from the Kola Peninsula, just north of Norway's northern borders. So European security equates to continental United States security, and I think Trump knows that.